So thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Jenny Hornick, and I'm the digital marketing specialist at JMIR Publications. And I'm very excited to welcome you to another one of our monthly editions of the Society of Digital Psychiatry and JMIR Mental Health webinar series. So today we have a very exciting topic. We're going to be discussing from apps to AI, rethinking clinical tools in patient care. And we have an exciting guest speaker to go over that with us today. But before we dive in, I just have a couple of items to go over with you. So first off, you will notice that your microphones are muted and they will remain muted for the entirety of the session. But we do encourage that you ask questions as they come up. And you can do so by just using the Q&A box that you'll find towards the bottom of your screen. And in the second half of the session, we will have an opportunity to answer those questions. Secondly, the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available later this week on our YouTube channel, and we'll also send it out to everyone who's registered via email, so you'll be able to access the content later and share it with your colleagues. So that's all for me. So I'm going to go ahead and pass things along to Dr. John Torous to get us started. So Dr. John Torous is the director of the Digital Psychiatry Division at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, which is an affiliated teaching hospital of Harvard Medical School. He's also the co-founder of the Society of Digital Psychiatry and the editor-in-chief of JMIR Mental Health. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. John Torous.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenny. And we have so much to cover. I'm going to introduce our terrific speaker today. So we have Dr. Eric Achtyes. He graduated from medical school at University of Michigan, did his adult psychiatry training at the Mass General McLean Harvard program. He's currently a professor and chair of psychiatry at Western Michigan University, Homer Stryker, MD, School of Medicine. Dr. Achtyes has been investigating over 60 clinical trials in schizophrenia and depression, including many of the formative studies actually looking at apps and technologies in care. These are the multi-site, large, randomized clinical studies. He's published over 100 peer-reviewed publications on these studies in JMIR Mental Health, BMJ, JAMA Psychiatry, Lancet, Molecular Psychiatry. And his work at the interface of psychiatry and technology really shows again how to do rigorous research, how to do an amazing evaluation. He's now looking at the work in the AI space. He'll share with us an interesting survey at the end of this to learn more about it. But I want to hand it over to Dr. Achtyes to really look at, again, what you've seen in the app space, what you see now in the AI space, and maybe give us a little preview of what's happening and where we're going. And then we'll join back up for questions pretty soon, because I know you have some slides to share.
So much, John, for the kind invitation. I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon. And what I'll do is go ahead and pull up my slides and share those with you guys, and we'll get started. So what we'll do here is move quickly through. I have my disclosures here. Make sure it's advancing. There we go. Really, the only disclosure of interest with this is a study that we're currently engaged in with Boehringer Ingelheim, which is looking at an app to treat the experiential negative symptoms of schizophrenia. And I'll share a little bit about that way at the end, but that's really the only one that's of interest for today's discussion. So one of the questions that arises is, how do you get into this space? How do you begin working on tech in medicine and psychiatry? And I'm just sharing with you my very first author publication from way back a few years ago. And the way that I got into this is I went to a meeting. I went to the American Society of Clinical Psychopharmacology meeting, and I heard a fantastic talk by Robert Gibbons from the University of Chicago and Nina Schooler. And he was describing this computerized adaptive test that he had developed. And the idea was that you could, instead of using a fixed length test like a PHQ-9, you could actually develop a large question bank related to, say, depression. And then you could ask the questions iteratively in a way to help you assess the severity of depression. And so what happens with the algorithm is it actually asks the next most informative question from this large validated question bank, so that you can actually vary the number of items that are asked, but fix the certainty or the level of precision that you want from the test. So some people, you may be able to ask just a few questions and very accurately assess their depression severity. And some people, you may need to ask many more questions to assess their depression severity. But it helps you really get to a point of severity with a high degree of accuracy. The example actually comes from the educational space. So for example, you can take a math test and you can give it to a kindergartner, and you can give the same test to a college math student. And the kindergartner, of course, is going to get maybe an algebra question and get it wrong, and they're going to get an easier question. And the college student is going to get an algebra question, get it right, and maybe they'll move up to calculus. But you can use the same test, and you can very quickly assess the knowledge of the college student and the knowledge of the kindergartner. So that's really the idea behind computerized adaptive testing. And so that was really kind of my intro into the tech space in psychiatry. Okay, fast forward. Smartphones, kind of the new Coke bottles. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but it used to be that you could go anywhere in the world, to the most remote village, no matter where it was, and amazingly, you'd find a crate with Coke bottles there. And somehow Coke had found its way down every path and village lane across the world, and people had access to Coca-Cola. Well, it turns out that now mobile phones and smartphones are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And in fact, there are probably more people using mobile phones on a routine basis than there are people who use toothbrushes to brush their teeth. One estimate is that about 3.5 billion people use a toothbrush routinely, and 5.8 billion people have a mobile phone subscription. And in addition, there are about 7.4 billion smartphones that are in use currently. And that's about 90% of the 8.2 billion people on the planet. So like many other people, I was taken by the tremendous potential to use these devices we carry in our pockets to disseminate evidence-based treatments to resource-poor areas. And so one of the areas I'm interested in is schizophrenia. So we were wondering, do patients with schizophrenia use smartphones? And if so, how much? And this was a survey study we did with Mary Brunette and a group from Dartmouth a few years ago. And we found out that it turns out that people with serious mental illness use smartphones. They use it almost as much as people in the general population. They use the internet, they use Facebook, they use social media at nearly identical rates. So it's a tool that could be helpful across different psychiatric conditions. So then the next thing that I got involved in is I was asked by John Kane in New York to participate in a study called Improving Care, Reducing Cost. And in this study, which is it's described in this 2016 paper with Mary Brunette as the lead author, we delivered 4 computerized or tech-enabled interventions to patients. There was a smartphone intervention called Focus. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. There was online computerized CBT for psychosis. There was a daily support website which provided information to patients and their family members. And then there was a prescriber decision support system to help prescribers use evidence-based algorithms to prescribe medication. And what we did is we enrolled about 400 patients who were just recently discharged from the psychiatric hospital. And the first 89 were a control group. They just got treatment as usual. And the next 349 got 6 months of this suite of tech interventions. And what we found was that we were able to reduce subsequent hospital days by almost 5 in the tech intervention group. So compared to that group with just treatment as usual, the tech group spent about 5 less days in the hospital over the next 6 months on average. So you'd say, wow, that's a pretty impactful intervention, an important intervention. I then went on to do an analysis of the Focus app because I was very interested in that. So the Focus app was the one that we used in this study. It was developed by Dror Benziv, who is now at the University of Washington. And it's an app that he developed, which is a schizophrenia illness self-management app. And it targets 5 particular areas. It helps patients with issues with sleep, voices, mood, medications, and social interactions. And it works in 2 different ways. You can set it with the patient to prompt them as many times a day as you would like. Do you have time to use Focus now? And if the answer is yes, then they'll access the app. They'll go through a series of questions and receive these tips. Or they can access it on demand whenever they wish. And my question was, is this app replacing access to human care? And so I wanted to look at when the app was being used. Is it being used 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, when they could have called a clinician to talk about the problem they were struggling with? Or were they using it in what I called off hours, so evenings, weekends, holidays? So we coded all the data, 75,000 total logins, and analyzed it. And it turns out that patients use the app a lot in both settings. They used it a lot during the day, about half the time, and they used it about half the time in those off hours. So it was adding a dose of intervention when they wouldn't have otherwise been able to get it that was significant. And we found that they use all 5 of those modules, both on and off hours, to a significant degree, 60.7%. During the off hours, they used all 5 modules, and 56.3% all 5 modules during office hours. So again, just looking at how are patients using these? When are they, how is it helping them? When do they most need what an app might have to offer? Okay, so then this spawned 2 kind of parallel lines of research using Focus. So Dror Benziv continued to modify and use the app, and he enrolled patients in an RTC of 163 patients from 2015 to 2017. And using this app for 3 months, they found it to be equivalent in outcomes compared to a clinic-based team called the RAP intervention. So they could either deploy the app or give patients access to a team of people. And they did just as well at 3 and 6 months with the app as they did with access to the team. He also licensed the Focus app to a company called Pear Therapeutics, and they took his app and they totally spiffed it up. They made it look app-like. It was very slick, it was easy to use, and it had I would say, very high face validity. It looked like, oh man, this is a great app. This is going to be terrific. And we participated in a multi-center randomized trial of that app. And so patients in this one had a control group of a sham. And the sham app was simply just a countdown timer. So if they were randomized to sham, they would click on the app, or the app would activate, and it would just go 60, 59, 58, 57, 56, and so forth. And surprisingly to all of us, the treatment difference at day 85 between the Pear app and the sham was 2.7 points in favor of the sham app. So which is right? You've got Dr. Benziv's line of research, which is showing that Focus works really well. It's comparable to human treatment team. And then you've got this that shows compared to a countdown timer, there was really no difference. And the lesson that I take away from this is we need properly controlled trials, randomized trials when we're testing apps to make sure that they really do work. Then the pandemic happened. So those of us who prefer face-to-face interactions with patients were thrust into using telepsych, whether we liked it or not. This was a paper that we published in 2020. It's a little bit hard to see, but these blue lines are the growth of telepsych and televideo appointments. And these kind of yellow were the in-person appointments and how those shrunk. And the majority of our appointments we were conducting in our clinic became televideo almost overnight. You can see this is March 2020, this is April 2020, May 2020. And most clinics had that kind of experience. It's like we flipped on telepsych very, very quickly. We participated in a study with John Kane and Danny Guinart looking at patients' attitudes towards telepsychiatry during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it turns out they liked it for the most part. They liked having access to their doctor through televideo. They liked the convenience. They liked being able to, not having to come in. They could do their visits at different times of day when it otherwise wouldn't be convenient or easy. But there were some limitations, and we saw some of those. We were also part of a study looking at the change in clinical management of patients who are on long-acting injectables during the COVID-19 pandemic and how that was being managed via telepsych. And there's some things that are a little bit harder to do, like it's hard to see a fine hand tremor maybe. You can't smell the patient. You can't flex their arm to see if they're having any cogwheel rigidity. It's hard to see their pupils sometimes to see if they're if they're dilated or pinpoint. So there are some advantages. You can see the place where the person lives, what their environment's like, but there are also some disadvantages in terms of using telepsych. And then we published a paper on telepsychiatry in the era of digital mental health startups. And again, some of these rapidly developed mental health startup companies really didn't adhere to principles of good telepsychiatry. There's inappropriate prescriptions of controlled substances. There's loss of privacy. They may screen out the sickest patients, etc. So there are some challenges. Again, telepsychiatry is a good tool we want to use, but it needs to be used appropriately. So then this was another study that we worked on. This was a study sponsored by Novartis, and this was a very brave study. The idea was to try to use televideo and telepsych to provide education, family psychoeducation to caregivers of patients with schizophrenia. And then they measured outcomes in the patients with schizophrenia. So you're delivering the intervention to a family member, a loved one, a caregiver, and you're looking for outcomes in the patient. So very risky study. And this was a large, again, multi-center trial. 148 pairs of participants were enrolled, of whom 96 patients and 94 caregivers completed the 12-month follow-up. And again, unfortunately, there was no difference observed between the study-provided psychoeducation group and the usual care control group in terms of treatment failure overall. So again, the point I'm trying to drive home is that we need appropriate RCTs in order to evaluate these tools. It was a great idea. It was a bold idea. It was a daring idea. But in this context, it didn't work. Then a good colleague of mine, Dr. Scott Monteith, who is here in Michigan, and I knew him for many years as he we worked in the public mental health system together. We were part of the Michigan Psychiatric Society together. He was part of an international collaboration that I thought was doing some really amazing work. If you haven't read it, I would encourage anybody to read their Lancet Psychiatry paper from 2019 on automation in psychiatry. And it's just a fantastic paper. And so it talks about how automation and tools may be used in psychiatry and what some of their limitations may be. And then another study that he did, which really caught my eye, he and collaborator Tasha Glenn did, is a comparison of psychiatric drug-drug interaction tools. You know, there's these online tools you can use to check for drug interactions. And it turns out that they don't have great correlation between the advice that they give. And so they did this initial study published in 2019, where they looked at 6 commercially available drug-drug interaction checkers, some that you had to pay for, some that were freely available. And they had pretty good overlap for some of the more severe interactions, but not great overlap overall. And so their advice in 2019 was you better use at least 2 interaction checkers if you're going to use that as a tool in your clinical care. And then they replicated the study 2 years later in 2021, and they still found that there was not convergence of the tools. So they actually wrote that the interaction database programs have not converged and should not be expected to align over time. So their advice was still to use more than one interaction checker, and if in doubt, consult a human. which I thought was great. Very interesting to see, to see if your pharmacist might have a better idea for you about what to look out for. So very, very impactful work for me. And so Scott very generously invited me to join their collaboration. And kind of the key members are Scott here in Michigan, Tasha Glenn, who had a background at Intel, and Peter Wybrow from California, and then John Geddes from the UK and Michael Bauer from Germany. And so over the last few years, we've started publishing a number of papers. Expectations for Artificial Intelligence in Psychiatry, I think, is a good kind of baseline paper. This paper, Differences Between Human and Artificial or Augmented Intelligence in Medicine, I think that's also a key paper, just to kind of understand, how does AI reasoning differ from human reasoning? And it differs in some very important ways, which I think are good for people to understand. This article in the British Journal of Psychiatry, Artificial Intelligence and Increasing Information, was published in 2023, has already been cited more than 150 times, so it's been a pretty influential article. And then I wrote an article, Technology Exceptionalism in Medicine, Is it Time to Rethink the Paradigm? And again, we need to not give a pass to things just because they're a tech intervention. We really do need to test them, and we need academics working in this space. Okay, so moving from apps to AI, what are some of the current challenges with AI? And I got to keep an eye on the time. I know we're running out, but really, truly, AI is not intelligent in the way humans are intelligent. They don't perform high-level reasoning or thought. They don't use common sense. They really don't understand causality or what they're saying. They don't ask why. They're not good handlers of outlying data. And the failure modes for AI are very unpredictable. So the point is that it's going to require a lot of human oversight for AI output. There are poor training data. I think many people have heard about that, but missing data, inaccuracy, coding errors, redundancies, lack of interoperability between vendor products. Behavioral health data are often missing or incorrect in the EHR. Stigmatizing symptoms may be underreported by patients. Psychiatric diagnoses may be omitted by practitioners. So there's lots of challenges with the training data. And then the data sets shift over time. So that could be caused by different population demographics, disease prevalence, measurement of technology, standards of care, and treatments available may be different in different places. Healthcare practices change over time, including new treatments. Anytime there's a new upgrade or a new training set, does that tool need to be revalidated? Those are really important questions. There are data privacy and ethical questions. So, for example, governments actually may use some of these tools and knowledge about citizens to suppress free speech, for example. AI tools for surveillance, speech recognition, and facial recognition are some of the tools that could be used in that way. AI can sometimes eliminate patient identifiers or de-identify the data, and then companies can get around HIPAA protections. And then algorithms can then be used to re-identify the majority of patients from that de-identified data. So there are real privacy concerns, and patients should be informed when AI is used in their care, and they need to consent to its use. There's automation bias and de-skilling. Automation bias is when users attribute more authority to an automated tool than to other sources of information. De-skilling, of course, is when we as physicians lose our skills because we're trusting a tool rather than our own knowledge. Tech immaturity. So again, the technology readiness level was developed by NASA in the 1970s to say when tech is ready for deployment. This is this scale here. There was a couple of studies of using the technology readiness level in medicine. And in 172 studies in intensive care medicine, 93% scored a TRL level of 4 or below, which is really still in the basic research or laboratory level. Levels 7 through 9 is testing, validation, and successful deployment in an operational environment. And none of those tools reached a level 9. So there's this concept of we can develop things really quickly, but are they really ready for widespread deployment? Have they been tested and shown to affect things? There's challenges with chatbots and liability. People and of course the companies want to anthropomorphize technology, make it seem like it's a human when it's not. They can create a false illusion of human help. They may give advice that's not correct. And then who's liable for that? Is it the physician who prescribed the use of the chatbot? Is it the health system? Is it the manufacturer of the chatbot? So there's those. And then when you employ any new tool, there's changes to workflow, which can affect safety. And of course, we need a way to validate in a regulatory environment that adequately tests these. And of course, then what's the return on investment for the tremendous amount of money that's being spent? So I'll stop there. I did want to highlight. I thought this was kind of interesting. The ECRI, which is the Emergency Care Research Institute, an independent organization founded in 1968, rated AI as the top 2025 health tech hazard for patients in our healthcare systems. And ironically, if you look back at their top hazards in 2017, they actually said that information management in electronic health records was their number one risk. And I think we just really want to make sure that as we implement AI tools in medicine, we're properly vetting them, and we're not going down the same road we did with EHRs where they really burned people out, and it's questionable whether they helped with patient care. So what have we got? Brain versus tech, brain on tech, or brain plus tech? And the human brain has evolved to perform an exaflop, which is a billion mathematical operations per second, using only 20 watts of power. And a supercomputer to do the same computations requires 20 megawatts of power, a million times more power. These things that we carry around between our ears are incredible, incredible tools and machines. They've evolved to be that way. So we shouldn't give up on our own human knowledge. And yet, the tools we carry around in our pockets, our smartphones, are incredibly powerful. They're sophisticated. They can provide all sorts of great tools for us as we practice medicine. And then there's the brain on tech. So you see here, this was from a 2018 Time magazine article entitled "The Masters of Mind Control" by Haley Edwards. And in that article, they call the tech obsession a full-blown epidemic. All of these apps are being developed to maximize eyeball time, how long we're on our smartphones and our apps. The idea is to create a diaper product that's so addictive you don't even get up to pee. So this is what people are trying to develop as they're making apps. And it's not that tech is inherently bad or inherently good. It's how we use it. And we need to use it for good purposes. Again, we need good clinicians in this space because I think our best scenario is brain plus tech. We need to be thinking about how best to use these tools and implement them for the benefits of our patients. And this is just a few things that we're working on now. Again, we're trying to understand physicians' attitudes, as John mentioned at the beginning, of AI in particular. So you can either scan the QR code or click on that
I
link.
put in the chat right now.
Okay, thanks so much, John. And
Yeah.
anyone who's a physician, so you got to be an MD, DO, MBBS or equivalent, any specialty, any level of training, we would love to hear what your thoughts are. And it's a little bit of we will send you a specific link to a tokenized survey just so we can keep track of how many responses we get. And that may take a day or two. So the survey will come to you, don't worry. But there's actually a human in the loop, so there might be a small delay. And then of course I mentioned we're working on the CT-155 app for negative symptoms. And then we've returned back to the CAD-MH where we're using that in some justice involved individuals, and then we have a number of papers under development. So I'll stop there. Thanks, John. I'm sorry we went a little bit over.
No, it's wonderful to hear it. I'm getting a sense that you read a lot of papers and kind of keep curious and see different things. And I think that's helpful for everyone listening to see there's always a lot to read, and clearly you're writing a lot too, but just how you kind of learned about different things, you were reading about it, seeing it, doing it. It's very encouraging. And again, maybe my quick summary is no one on this call is a Luddite. We all are excited about health technology. That's why we're here. But I think what was inspiring too is you were asking the critical questions and saying, well, if it worked well in a pilot study, does it work well in a randomized study of an appropriate control group? And that doesn't mean we don't like technology, we don't want it to work. It just means that we want the things that are most effective for patients, and we know that RCTs have to be done at the highest quality, or else they're not going to yield the answers or build a product that's going to help people or a company do well. And I think that's just very encouraging because sometimes we see these RCTs are almost set up only to succeed. And you've kind of helped think about design, even those more, I think I'm not going to call them complex because they make sense, but at least kind of a, what do you call it, a higher order RCT or more involved?
I mean, I think anytime, we think about, again, borrowing from kind of the pharma model, you can have a really great idea and you show that it's safe in phase one, and then it works in patients with the disorder in phase two, but that's maybe you've tested it in 100 or 150 people in phase two. There is a large loss of leads between phase two and phase three. So phase three, of course, is multi-center randomized controlled trials. They're very highly structured, very highly regulated. And that's where a lot of leads fail, is that jump from phase two to phase three. And I think we need to hold tech to those same standards, our tech interventions. They really do need to, not only work with a handful of people in my clinic, but they need to work in your clinic and
Yeah.
someone else's clinic anywhere in the world. And we need to show that kind of rigor and that kind of success. And honestly, I think that's the only way we're going to get third-party payers to pay for these tools, is if we show that kind of rigor.
And that kind of leads into this question from the audience saying, is there an evolving mental health tech industry that's an analog to the pharmaceutical industry in that they develop and deploy these interventions in an organized manner? Because I think we're seeing a lot of kind of firms or startups get behind one tech and they push it as hard as they can. But does anyone kind of take a broader approach, to perhaps like the pharmaceutical industry? It starts from what is this molecule in the dirt?
Yeah. Well, I think we should be. I mean, I think we should absolutely be organizing and maybe developing, like you can look at oncology, for example. They have multiple networks that when a new lead for treatment of a particular type of cancer needs to be tested, they've got networks of sites all around the country or all around the world that can very quickly test new compounds, even in rare cancers. And so they work together in these networks. I think we need to do that. We need to have tech networks that are at reputable institutions that are committed to quality and safety and efficacy. And we need to insist that the tools be tested in those networks to be shown that they're safe and effective. And everybody loves a winner, John, right? So, everybody likes to see, a study where something really works well. But I highlighted in this example a few studies that failed because I think it's important for us to remember that they're not all going to work out, and we do need to do the rigorous testing in order to find the ones that really will help patients, as you
Yeah.
said earlier.
And again, if they had no harm, they couldn't fail, they wouldn't need to be regulated or studied. If they were truly that amazing, we'd be in a different world, but they're not quite. This is an interesting question from Scott, who, of course, you referred to and has done many papers into spacing. Any suggestions for working around AI's black box created by intellectual property protections, especially as that relates to initial offerings around efficacy and risk? And how would we kind of vet or understand when someone says, I have this new AI algorithm, it predicts everything, but you can't see it?
I mean, that's a huge problem, I think, for this space, is the kind of the IP, the intellectual property protections that people will put in place. I the example that I'll give is actually again from pharmacology. We look at the pharmacogenomic tests that have been developed, which are supposed to kind of help us identify which what's the next antidepressant I should use with this patient. And they'll do a genetic test, and a lot of those algorithms were really kept very secret for a long time, in terms of it would say, okay, this is a green bin medication or an orange bin or a red bin. And people didn't know how to interpret that. They thought green meant go and red meant stop, when it really just tells you about maybe about dosing, but it doesn't account for inducible, poor metabolizers or inducible rapid metabolizers. So I think we are going to need to demand that tech open up the black box and show us how it works. And we're gonna have to demand that we understand the proof of concept and what that concept is, and does the concept make sense, and then does it work in the real world with real patients? So I, I think we have to demand. I think regulation would help us in terms of perhaps setting an environment in which we need to understand at least certain basics about how those algorithms are developed. It definitely goes against the move fast and break things kind of ethos to stop and slow down and do these studies. But honestly, I think that's what we need. I think that's the direction we need to go.
Otherwise, we're almost out of time, but I'll just editorialize again. These studies can be done fairly quickly. As you said, people have the phones, so software can be downloaded. People can be randomized, the controls can be digital. So there is a world where these studies that can be both rigorous but quick and certainly less expensive than a traditional pharmaceutical study. They're not going to be free, we agree, but I think as the technology improves, how we can run these remote decentralized studies is going to improve too. And I think, again, I just appreciate your examples from the apps because, of course, we want things to work and we want to make sure that we keep guiding how things work. And even in the cases where you found it was negative, I think from reading those papers, I know that you guys found mechanisms, you help us explore what's working. So you can still learn a lot from those negative studies in it.
Absolutely.
And so it's not, again, more just an adventure to see can it work in it. But I think it's wonderful having you share kind of your career, what you've read, what you've seen, how it's worked, how it's not worked, and how it's leading into this AI world, because I think it really gives, especially the junior people listening, a story of how you can be involved in this space too. It's open, it's evolving, it's changing. There's lots of papers to read, but they're accessible. Most of them are free. And so I want to thank you again, Dr. Matthews, for coming and speaking to us. And thank you again to JMIR for hosting it and the Society of Digital Psychiatry. So thank you, everyone. Until next time.